Alex sat on the couch, staring blankly at the flickering TV. His mind wasn't really on the late-night sports highlight show playing before him. It hadn't been for weeks. The hum of the program buzzed in the background as his thoughts spiraled into the same place they always did these days. Sarah. His wife, the woman he had built his life with, seemed like a stranger lately. It had started small, subtle things Alex tried to brush off. He'd come home from work and find her on her phone, quickly locking the screen as he walked through the door. She wasn't as talkative as she used to be, as though there was something she was keeping to herself. The easy laughter they once shared over dinner now felt forced, like she was going through the motions. Alex had always prided himself on being level-headed, not the kind of guy who would jump to conclusions. But these days, something felt off, and it was gnawing at him in a way he couldn't shake. That night, as the clock approached midnight, Sarah was still out. She had said she was meeting a few colleagues for drinks after work, a usual occurrence that had become more frequent lately. At first, he didn't think much of it. After all, they both had their own lives, and he had always been supportive of her career. But now, with every passing hour, his unease grew. Where was she? He heard the soft chime of her phone. It was sitting next to him on the couch, the screen lighting up briefly. His eyes flicked toward it. The message wasn't from anyone he recognized. His heart beat a little faster as the words glowed on the screen for a moment before it dimmed. "Can't wait to see you again." Alex stared at the phone, his chest tightening. His first instinct was to dismiss it. There must be a logical explanation. Maybe it was one of her friends, maybe even a coworker making plans. But something didn't feel right. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Sarah walked in just then, startling him. She looked slightly surprised to see him awake, but quickly composed herself, smiling in the way she always did when she wanted to avoid a topic. "Hey, I didn't think you'd still be up," she said casually, setting her bag down by the door. "I couldn't sleep," Alex replied, keeping his tone neutral. His eyes followed her as she kicked off her shoes and walked over to grab her phone. She picked it up, glancing at the screen briefly before locking it and slipping it into her pocket. A flicker of something passed across her face, something Alex couldn't quite place. "How was your night?" he asked, his voice betraying none of the anxiety gnawing at him. He didn't want to seem accusatory, but he needed to know. "Good," she said a little too quickly. "Just the usual. We had a couple of drinks, talked about work, nothing exciting." She flashed a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Alex felt his jaw clench, but he tried to keep calm. "Who were you meeting again?" "Just the team," she replied, brushing past him toward the kitchen. "Why?" "No reason," he said, following her with his eyes. The tension in his chest was growing, a pressure building that he couldn't ignore. He thought about the message on her phone, how she had pocketed it so quickly, and tried to push the paranoia away. "I saw a text come in when I was sitting on the couch," he finally said, trying to sound casual. "Something about 'can't wait to see you again.'" "Who was that?" Sarah froze for a split second, her back to him as she filled a glass of water. When she turned around, her face was neutral, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Annoyance, maybe fear. "Oh, that?" She laughed lightly. "It was a wrong number, probably spam." Alex nodded, forcing a tight smile. "Right." She moved toward the hallway, the conversation clearly over in her mind. "I'm going to bed," she said, her tone now brisk. "I'm exhausted." As she disappeared down the hallway, Alex sat there, staring into the empty room. His heart was racing, his mind filled with a dozen questions he didn't know how to ask. Something was definitely wrong, and now he couldn't ignore it. His thoughts raced, replaying every moment over the last few months. The missed dinners, the late nights, the sudden distance between them. It all started to fall into place in the worst possible way. He didn't want to believe it. He loved Sarah. They had built a life together, shared 6 years of marriage, weathered the ups and downs of life, and always come out stronger. Or so he thought. The idea that she could be hiding something, betraying him, was too much to accept. But that message, he couldn't ignore it. The next few days passed in a haze of doubt. Alex tried to act normal, but everything felt strained. Sarah was more guarded than usual, her phone constantly glued to her side. She gave him vague excuses whenever she went out, always with a dismissive smile that told him not to worry. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. One night, while Sarah was in the shower, he made a decision he never thought he'd make. He couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. His hands shook slightly as he picked up her phone, unlocking it easily. The passcode hadn't changed. His heart pounded as he scrolled through her messages, feeling a pit form in his stomach with each swipe. And then he found it. The text thread wasn't long, but it told him everything he needed to know. There were plans for a lunch meeting, compliments about how beautiful she looked last time, and subtle flirtations that made Alex's skin crawl. But the one message that broke him completely was from a few nights ago. I can't wait to see you again. Thursday. Usual spot? The name above the messages was John, a coworker of hers he had met once or twice. They had always seemed friendly, too friendly, now that he thought about it. His hand trembled as he locked the phone and placed it back exactly where he found it. His heart was pounding in his chest, his breath shallow. He sat there, staring at the wall, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Sarah was cheating on him. There was no other explanation. She was seeing John behind his back, lying to his face, and pretending everything was fine. The weight of it settled on his chest like a boulder, crushing the breath out of him. When Sarah came out of the shower, smiling as if nothing had changed, Alex barely looked at her. He couldn't. Everything was different now. He was different. He had seen the truth, and there was no going back. But he didn't confront her. Not yet. Something inside him stopped him from saying the words that were clawing at his throat. No, Alex decided. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet. He needed to know more. He needed proof. He needed to make sure that when the moment came, when he finally decided to bring it up, there would be no escaping the truth. No lies she could spin. No excuses she could make. Alex barely slept the night after his discovery. He lay in bed, listening to the steady rhythm of Sarah's breathing next to him, his mind racing. The knowledge of her betrayal gnawed at him like a living thing, a cold knot in his gut that refused to loosen. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the text messages between her and John, the casual intimacy in their words like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He couldn't confront her yet, not until he knew more, until he had enough to leave her no way out. In the days that followed, Alex's world narrowed to a single goal, finding out everything he could about Sarah's affair. He watched her closely, noting every detail that seemed out of place, every suspicious action. It wasn't long before he noticed a pattern. Sarah had always been social, but lately she seemed to be going out more often, always with a vague explanation of work meetings or catching up with friends. It was all the same. Rushed goodbyes, forced smiles, and long, unexplained absences. The first time Alex decided to follow her, his hands shook with a mixture of nerves and fury. He had never been the kind of man to spy on anyone, let alone his wife, but now it felt like the only way to preserve his sanity. He had to know. Sarah left the house one evening after dinner, saying she had a late meeting with a client. Alex pretended to be distracted by a work call, wishing her good luck as she kissed him on the cheek before walking out the door. The moment she was gone, he grabbed his jacket and quietly followed her. His heart raced as he trailed her car at a safe distance, careful not to get too close. His palms were slick with sweat as he gripped the steering wheel, watching the taillights of her car blur in the rain. She didn't drive to her office as she had claimed. Instead, she turned into a small, dimly lit parking lot on the outskirts of town. Alex's stomach churned when he saw the restaurant sign glowing faintly in the mist, an upscale place they had been to only once on their second wedding anniversary. The thought that she had chosen that place for her secret meetings with John made his blood boil. Alex parked a few cars down and waited, his heart hammering in his chest. He watched as Sarah stepped out of the car, her face illuminated briefly by the streetlights. She looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, before walking into the restaurant. Minutes later, John arrived. Alex clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. There was no mistaking it. John walked into the restaurant, smiling as he greeted Sarah at the entrance. The two of them hugged briefly before disappearing inside. Alex stayed in his car, his mind racing. He felt numb, like he was watching the entire thing unfold from a distance, as though it was happening to someone else. But the pit in his stomach reminded him this was real. This was his life, his wife. For the next few hours, Alex waited. It felt like an eternity, the minutes dragging by as he tried to calm the anger boiling inside him. His eyes never left the entrance of the restaurant, and when Sarah and John finally emerged, it was as though time had slowed to a crawl. They were laughing, completely at ease, as though they had no care in the world. Alex watched as they said their goodbyes, John placing a hand on her arm in a gesture far too intimate for colleagues. He wanted to get out of the car, to confront them right there in the parking lot, but something held him back. Not yet. He needed to be smarter than that. This wasn't the time for an outburst. This was the time to gather everything he needed to expose her for what she was: a liar, a cheat, and a betrayer of their marriage. When Alex returned home that night, he felt like he was living a double life. Sarah came home a little while after him, her usual forced smile plastered on her face as she asked him about his evening. He couldn't even look at her. Every word she said felt like a lie, every glance laced with the betrayal that only he knew about. But he kept his face neutral, his answers short, while inside, the storm was building. The following days were a blur of quiet investigation. Alex began checking Sarah's phone more often, waiting until she was asleep or in the shower. Each time his stomach twisted with a sickening mix of dread and anger. The messages between her and John grew more explicit, the affair no longer even remotely concealed. They discussed meeting places, plans for future weekends, even shared moments of reminiscing about their nights together. It wasn't just physical, that realization hit Alex like a punch to the gut. Sarah wasn't just sleeping with John. She was emotionally invested. She talked to John the way she used to talk to Alex in the early days of their relationship. The flirty, intimate messages, the jokes, the confessions of longing, all of it made Alex's chest ache. She was falling for this man, maybe already had. The worst blow came one evening as Alex scrolled through their latest conversation. They were planning to meet again the following weekend, and John mentioned something that made Alex's blood run cold. "You've thought about what we talked about, right? Leaving him? We could have the life we both want, Sarah, just you and me." Alex's grip tightened on the phone, his vision blurring with rage. He read the message over and over, his mind struggling to process the meaning behind it. She was thinking about leaving him, selling the house, walking away from everything they had built together. His mind spiraled as he imagined her standing in this very house, looking around at all the memories they had created, planning to walk out the door and never come back. He felt sick, but instead of confronting her that night, Alex made a decision. He wasn't going to let her blindside him. He wasn't going to sit by and let her tear their life apart without a fight. If Sarah wanted to leave him for John, she was going to pay the price. From that moment on, Alex's plan began to take shape. He started quietly moving his money into a separate account, one Sarah wouldn't have access to. He contacted a divorce lawyer, asking for advice on how to protect his assets when the time came. He stopped being passive, instead taking control of the situation with a calm, methodical approach. Sarah remained oblivious. She continued her affair, slipping out of the house with more excuses and fewer explanations. She had no idea that Alex knew everything, that her lies were unraveling with every text, every late night meeting, every kiss she shared with John. Alex was playing the long game now. He wasn't going to explode with rage and let her twist the situation to her advantage. No. When he finally revealed what he knew, he was going to do it in a way that would leave her no room to hide, no way to manipulate the truth. He was going to the way she had ruined his. As their 6th wedding anniversary approached, Alex knew the time was almost right. He started planning a big celebration, an event Sarah would never forget. He made reservations at one of their favorite restaurants, invited all their friends and family, and even suggested they throw a party afterward. Sarah seemed thrilled by the idea, thinking it was his way of rekindling their relationship. She had no idea what he was really planning. The idea of revenge had taken root deep within Alex, quietly growing over the weeks until it was the only thing keeping him moving forward. Every time Sarah smiled at him, every kiss she placed on his cheek, every sweet lie she whispered, it only fueled his determination. He had come to realize that the marriage he once cherished was a facade built on trust that Sarah had shattered. But now it was his turn to break something, her. It was early morning, just a few days before their 6th wedding anniversary, when Alex sat down at the dining table with a cup of coffee in hand. Across the table, Sarah was scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of what was happening behind her back. She had no idea that her texts had already been forwarded to Alex's private email. She didn't know about the bank account he'd opened under his name alone, or the assets he was quietly pulling out from their shared finances. Every step he took in silence, allowing her to live in her fantasy for just a little while longer. But the anniversary party was drawing closer, and Alex's plan was now fully in motion. He had hired a divorce lawyer weeks ago, making sure every legal avenue was covered. His assets were protected, his personal accounts were growing, and Sarah wouldn't see a penny from him once it all came crashing down. He had played the doting husband in front of her, pretending that the anniversary party was his grand gesture to reignite their marriage. And Sarah, caught up in her own web of lies, seemed to believe every word. "Are you excited for the party?" Alex asked casually, taking a sip from his mug. Sarah looked up, smiling brightly. "Of course. It'll be so nice to have everyone together again. It feels like forever since we've done something like this." Alex nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "I thought it would be a nice change. We could use some time with family and friends, don't you think?" Sarah's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Yeah, definitely. It's been a stressful few months, so this will be a great way to unwind." She went back to scrolling on her phone, her fingers tapping out a quick message. Alex didn't need to ask who she was texting. He already knew it was John. He knew they had plans to meet later that afternoon. A secret lunch tucked away in a corner of the city where they wouldn't be spotted. Sarah had grown so comfortable with her affair that she no longer tried to hide her sneaky glances at her phone or the way she made excuses to leave the house. She assumed she was in control, that she was keeping Alex in the dark. She couldn't have been more wrong. Alex checked his watch, knowing he had an appointment with the realtor soon. He hadn't told Sarah yet, but he was in the process of putting the house on the market. It had been easy enough to arrange once he'd moved the bulk of his funds into his personal account. He didn't care what she did with her life after the party. He only knew that she wouldn't be staying in the home they'd built together. When this was over, the house would be gone, just like their marriage. Later that day, while Sarah was out with John, Alex met with the realtor to finalize the listing. Standing in the empty living room, Alex found himself reflecting on all the memories they had made in this house. The dinner parties, the lazy Sunday mornings, the late-night conversations on the porch. It all felt so distant now, like a life that had belonged to someone else. He wasn't angry anymore. The fury that had consumed him for so long had burned away, leaving only cold resolve. Sarah had broken him, but he was going to come out of this stronger, and she was going to be left with nothing. By the time Sarah came home that evening, Alex was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch a game on TV. She walked in with a carefree smile, her bag slung over her shoulder as she greeted him. "How was your day?" "Busy," he replied, not looking at her. "Got a lot done." "Good." She dropped her bag by the door and joined him on the couch. "You're still okay with the guest list for Saturday, right? I know it's a lot of people, but I'm really excited to see everyone." Alex smiled slightly, his gaze still fixed on the screen. "Yeah, it'll be great." Sarah leaned in to kiss him on the cheek, and for a moment, Alex felt a pang of sadness. This was the woman he had once loved with everything he had. But that love had been poisoned by her lies, and now all he could feel was the sharp sting of betrayal. She pulled away, none the wiser, and went into the kitchen to start dinner. The next day, Alex began setting the final stage of his plan into motion. He reached out to John's wife, someone he had only met once or twice at company functions. He had debated whether or not to involve her, but in the end, he decided she deserved to know the truth. The message he sent was simple and direct. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but I think you should know that your husband John has been having an affair with my wife, Sarah." I've attached some proof. You deserve to know the truth just like I did. He attached screenshots of the texts he had collected, making sure to include the most incriminating ones. Then he hit send and waited. It didn't take long for her to reply. John's wife, Emily, was stunned, furious, and heartbroken all at once. She thanked Alex for telling her, and he could feel the raw emotion in her words. They agreed to meet up before the party. Emily wanted to confront John in person, and Alex knew exactly when and where it would happen. He made sure to keep their plans secret, knowing that it would be the final nail in the coffin for Sarah and John's affair. The day of the party arrived faster than Alex expected. He had planned every detail meticulously, making sure everything was perfect. Sarah was excited, bustling around the house that morning, double-checking the decorations and going over the guest list one more time. She had no idea what was coming. Alex watched her with a sense of detachment, the woman in front of him almost unrecognizable from the person he had married. By the time guests began to arrive, the house was filled with laughter and chatter. Friends and family mingled, drinks flowed, and the atmosphere was lively. Sarah was the perfect hostess, smiling and chatting with everyone, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Alex kept his distance, quietly observing the room as the evening unfolded. He knew it was only a matter of time before the moment arrived. Emily was already there, mingling with the crowd, keeping her eyes on John, who was oblivious to what was about to happen. Sarah, too, floated around the room, greeting guests and basking in the attention. She still believed everything was under her control, but as the night wore on, Alex felt the building. His heart pounded in his chest as he prepared for the moment of reckoning. He stood by the fireplace, looking out at the sea of faces. Friends, family, people who had known him and Sarah for years, all of them would witness what was about to unfold. Finally, when the time felt right, Alex raised his glass, signaling for everyone's attention. The room quieted, and Sarah turned to him with a beaming smile, clearly thinking this was his moment to toast their anniversary. Alex could feel the weight of what was coming, but there was no turning back now. He cleared his throat and began. The room was quiet now, all eyes fixed on Alex as he stood by the fireplace, raising his glass. The hum of conversation had died down, and the atmosphere shifted from lively celebration to curious anticipation. Alex could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him, but none more than Sarah's. She was smiling at him, a look of pride and affection on her face, completely unaware of the devastation about to unfold. Alex cleared his throat, steadying himself for what was about to come. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. This was the moment he had been planning for weeks, the moment where the truth would come crashing down on Sarah and John in front of everyone they knew. I just want to say a few words, Alex began, his voice calm, steady. 6 years of marriage. He glanced around the room at the friends and family who had gathered to celebrate what they thought was a happy occasion. It's been a journey, hasn't it, Sarah? He turned his gaze to his wife, who smiled back at him, nodding, clearly believing this was going to be a sweet, sentimental toast. And like any journey, it's had its ups and downs. Alex continued, his tone measured. We've had good times and hard times, but through it all we've always had each other, or at least that's what I thought. A murmur rippled through the crowd, people exchanging glances, sensing the shift in Alex's tone. Sarah's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. But sometimes, Alex said, locking eyes with Sarah, you find out that the person you thought was with you wasn't really there at all. The confusion on Sarah's face deepened, but before she could say anything, Alex continued. I want to tell you all a story about betrayal, about lies, about what it feels like to have the person you love, the person you trust with your whole heart, rip that trust apart piece by piece. The room had gone dead silent now, the tension thick in the air. Alex could see the nervous glances, could feel the crowd leaning in, hanging on his every word, but he wasn't finished. For the last year, Alex said, his voice unwavering, Sarah has been having an affair. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Alex saw Sarah's face drain of color, her eyes wide with shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was frozen in place, trapped in the moment she had feared might one day come. With John, Alex added, his gaze shifting to the man standing near the back of the room, who now looked like he had seen a ghost. John's face twisted in panic, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. All eyes had turned toward him now, and the realization of what Alex had just revealed hit him like a freight train. Alex let the weight of the words sink in, watching as Sarah's world crumbled around her. She tried to stammer something, her hands shaking as she reached for him. But he took a step back, his expression cold. "You thought you could lie to me," Alex said, his voice low and controlled. "You thought you could betray me, hide everything, and I would never find out. But I did, Sarah. I know everything. Every text, every lie, every single moment you spent with him." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, her face pale as she shook her head. "Alex, please, it's not what you think." Alex raised a hand, cutting her off. "It's exactly what I think. I've seen the messages, Sarah. I followed you. I know what you've been doing behind my back." He turned toward the crowd now, addressing them directly. "I didn't want to believe it at first. I didn't want to think that the woman I married, the woman I loved, could betray me like this. But she did. And tonight, I wanted you all to know the truth." The room was filled with stunned silence. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, while others stood frozen, staring at Sarah and John, who both looked as though the ground had been pulled out from under them. Alex wasn't finished yet. "You know, Sarah," he said, his voice softening with a touch of bitterness, "I thought we had something special, but you were willing to throw it all away for him. You didn't just lie to me, you lied to everyone here." Sarah's tears were flowing freely now, but Alex felt no sympathy for her, not after everything she had done. "I gave you my heart," he continued, his voice filled with the weight of his pain, "and you gave it to someone else." Before Sarah could say anything, a voice broke through the heavy silence. It was Emily, John's wife, stepping forward from the crowd. Her eyes were burning with fury, her hands trembling as she pointed a finger at John. "You disgusting liar," she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "I trusted you, John. I thought you loved me, but all this time with her?" John opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but there was no way out now. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see. Emily turned towards Sarah, her face twisted with contempt. "And you? I thought you were my friend. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to Alex?" Sarah was sobbing now, her face in her hands, as she crumbled under the weight of the truth. But Alex wasn't done yet. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," Alex said, his voice calm but firm. "The papers are being filed as we speak. This marriage is over, Sarah, and so is everything you thought you were going to take from me." Sarah looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. "Alex, please, I can explain." But Alex shook his head. "There's nothing to explain. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." He stepped away from the fireplace, walking toward the door, as the guests stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to say or do. Alex felt lighter than he had in months, as though a weight had been lifted from his chest. The anger, the betrayal, the lies. It was all out in the open now. There was nothing left to hide. As he reached the door, he turned back one last time, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "I loved you," he said quietly, "but you didn't love me enough." Everyone there was stunned. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from Alex's revelation was swift and brutal. Sarah had tried to salvage what she could of her reputation, but the truth had spread through their social circle like wildfire. John and Emily's marriage quickly dissolved, and Sarah found herself ostracized by their friends, many of whom sided with Alex after learning the full extent of her betrayal. The house was sold, as Alex had planned, and he walked away with everything Sarah had once thought she could take from him. He didn't look back. There was no point in dwelling on what had been lost. For Alex, the pain of betrayal would never fully fade. But as the turned into months, he found himself starting to heal.